And God saw that it was good. That faithful echo, that 7-word refrain, is the hallmark of the 7-day creation story in Genesis. And God saw that it was good. In the translation we heard this morning from The Voice, it embellishes it a bit more. And God saw that it was beautiful and good. We know something about the goodness and beauty of creation here in Colorado, don't we? The purple mountain majesty, the flickering gold of the aspens, the pinkish-orange hues of the sunsets, the rush and roar of the white water rapids, the reflective still waters of the mountain lakes, the crisp, brisk, mile-high air, the smell of pine, the whisper-white blanket after a blizzard, the mystique of the elk and the moose, the flashing colors of the leaping trout, and the amazing beauty of even the roses in Mary Holst's garden. When you live in Colorado, it's not hard to believe that all of creation is beautiful and good. Because of that, it can be all too easy to romanticize Genesis 1. Because as much as we love this creation story and the rhythmic refrain, and God saw that it was good, we have to ask ourselves, with all of our human development and impact, does our Creator God still look at creation and say, it is good? You know, we have our very first commandment from God in Genesis 1. And I love the way that The Voice paraphrases it in verses 27 and 28. So God created humanity in his image. God blessed them and gave them this directive: I make you trustees of my estate. So care for my creation, the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that roams the earth. We are to be trustees or stewards of this beautiful earth. Now, a steward is someone who takes care of and manages something that is not theirs. To be a steward or trustee of something is to look at it from the eyes of the person who owns it, right? You're looking at it through their eyes and their desires, not your own. So if you're a steward of someone's financial affairs or their estate, in that case, you would make decisions based on what you feel would most align with their values or with the instructions that they gave you. Even stewardesses, now called flight attendants, well, they got their name because they are in charge of tending to the needs and lives of people that are in their care, the passengers. So to be a steward of the earth is to understand that this planet is not ours. We do not own this earth, even if we do have a piece of paper that says we own a plot of land that has a house on it. The earth is not ours. It is God's. We are to look at creation through the eyes of our Creator and tend to its needs with the same way that God tends to our needs. Now, that may not be a very compelling argument for some of you, but I think as people of faith, you know, when we care about other rules and commandments of God, it's puzzling why we don't care more about this one. When we care about those things in the Bible that speak to our bodies and our beliefs and our relationships, but we overlook the very thing that allows all these things to exist, our ecosystems in our world, well, what are we doing? Pastor Carolyn Bush thoughtfully writes, you know, we humans are like the foreign species. We generally do not know our place within the natural systems. We want to alter and control nature for our own purposes without placing limitations on ourselves. We value human interests over the interests of the vast majority of God's creation. We don't like limitations. She says, neither did Adam and Eve. But as people of faith, we need to find wise uses for our freedom, which involves placing wise limitations on ourselves and doing what God asks us to do in the first place, to serve creation, not demand that creation serve us. In the second biblical story of creation, so not the one we read today, but the one that's in Genesis 2, we see that God puts Adam to work, instructing him to till the earth, which is inherent to his very name. In Hebrew, the root of the word Adam is Adamah, which means ground or soil. So God formed the first human and placed Adamah in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Hebrew word for keep is shamar. It has the meaning to watch over or to preserve, as in, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Shema Adonai Eloheinu. The word for till is abad. And when used in connection with land or soil, it carries the meaning of tilling the land. But the more general understanding of that verb, abad, is to labor or to serve. What might it mean if the first person's function within God's creation was not only to farm and care for the garden, but also to serve and to protect the soil from which he was formed? What might it mean for us to serve and protect and preserve this wonderful creation that God has given us, that really is our very lives? Preserving the beauty of creation is not convenient or comfortable, but it is a part of a covenant that we have with God, a covenant that goes back to the earliest writers of the biblical text who penned both Genesis 1 and 2. Allow me a brief history lesson in Old Testament authorship. There is a point coming, trust me. The author of Genesis 2, scholars call J, because this author uses the word Yahweh for God. And in German, Yahweh begins with J, and Germans were the ones writing about all of this stuff. So in J, Yahweh is an anthropomorphic figure. So in Genesis 2 and 3, we see God walking and talking with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. You know the song, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am not alone. That is all J. The author in Genesis 1, scholars call P. And this is easy to remember because it's from the priestly tradition. And P's writings involve stories, but mostly laws. I mean, think Leviticus, think Numbers, all of that is P. The P works are concerned with priestly matters, ritual law, the origins of shrines and genealogies, and it's all expressed in a very formal and repetitive style. It stresses rules and rituals of worship. And on another level, the writing of P suggests that God is majestic and transcendent, the one who gives these rules in this order, and all things happen because of this rule and order. And so P, the writer, is deeply concerned with the ritual and purity of land and people and preserving holiness. Now you can see this very orderly influence in Genesis 1 in terms of how creation is described in 7 days, because each day has a balance and it's very specific order to things. It's rhythmic, it's got a repetitive style, and it's also where we get this direct instruction to care for creation, to treat it with holy care, as a priest would treat any sacrament. And I remind you that we're Baptists, so we are the priesthood of all believers. We're all priests. I'm telling you about the authors of Genesis 1 and 2, not only for you to have a bit more biblical knowledge for trivia games or cocktail conversations, but also so that you can see that whether the biblical author was focused on a more personal or anthropomorphic kind of God, or whether they were focused on the more majestic and transcendent, holy and orderly nature of God, the care of creation mattered. In other words, whether you understand God to be far away and distant, someone or something that started this whole evolutionary journey with the Big Bang and then let things take its course, or whether you understand God to be very involved in your life in a deeply personal and everyday kind of way, or whether you have a little bit of both in you, either way, the care of creation matters. Both understandings and theologies of God show us that how we treat this gift of a green earth matters. And not only does it matter, it is a sacred and holy commandment. And it is a part of a relational covenant with God. I think the reason that it's so hard for me, I don't know about you, but hard for me to treat all of creation as holy and sacred is that I can't physically see or experience all of creation. You hear me talk about our golden retriever Deacon a lot. I can see Deacon. I love Deacon. I treat Deacon way better probably than Deacon deserves to be treated. I'll do anything to protect him. We all see the beauty of the Rocky Mountains before us, and many of us may give money to help keep them protected and preserved. But you know, we can't see things like the trash underneath the ocean. We can't see the pollution in the air, and when we can, we know it's really bad. We can't see the animals that are dying or becoming extinct because of ecosystems that are being altered. We can't see the trees that are being cut down. We just know all of a sudden there are more buildings. There is so much that we can't see. We can't see what our earth and world will look like in 20, 50, 100 years. We only see what we see today, what we see out the window of our house, what we see as we drive to work or to school, what we see when we take a trip to the mountains or a vacation to the beach. This is all we see, and it's really a very limited vision. And you know what they say, out of sight, out of mind. So the struggle with caring for all creation, I think, is our seeing, or lack thereof. Because in general, when we can see something, man, it hits us in the gut, right? We internalize it, and enough so that it makes us want to change our actions. Modern news sources and journalism really do help us see more than we could otherwise. But sometimes I think it overwhelms us more than it informs us or empowers us to change. Forgive me for taking his words out of context, but in Matthew 19, Jesus says, "With man, things are impossible, but with God, all things are possible." With God, we can care for creation. And I think the way we get ourselves to be with God on this is to think of creation as beloved. And to do this, I want to invite us to think of the term beloved as you would a spouse or a partner or a lover or even a close friend. If someone is your beloved, you love them for who they are, not who you want them to be. You do your best to provide for their needs, not to depend on them solely only for your needs. You give back to them just as they give to you. You do not use them for what they have, but rather you love them for who they are. You value their intrinsic beauty and do not tell them they need to change in order for you to love them. You sacrifice for them just as they sacrifice for you. So let's take those things and think about creation as our beloved. What does it mean to love creation for what it is and not for what we want it to be? The example that keeps coming to my mind is natural disasters. Because of all the horrific images on the TV and the grief and lament we feel for people's whose lives are really upturned and will never be the same again. But you know, hurricanes and earthquakes are a natural thing of creation. Hurricanes are how the weather relieves pressure. Earthquakes happen when plates shift under the earth. We have built up our lives around them, but we really can't get mad at God when they happen, as they are a natural part of creation. What does it mean to love creation for what it is? What does it mean to provide for creation's needs and not only depend on creation to solely provide for our needs? Maybe we think about it this way: we depend on water to live. Water keeps us alive. We can't live without it. It meets a fundamental need of ours. So how can we better support the needs of our water sources, oceans and lakes, ponds and streams? What does it mean to give back to creation just as it has given so much to you? I mean, we get paper from trees and food from plants, and we've lost many trees and forests and plants to all of our development, and we can't get those back, but we can be co-creators in a sense, giving life to new ones, planting a new tree, supporting companies that don't engage in deforestation. What does it mean to not use creation for what it has, but to love it for what it is? Maybe this means rethinking how we use oil and gas and wind and solar. We use when it comes to our natural resources. And I'm not saying they're not there to be used. I think they are. But these resources are not unlimited. Just as we can't use our loved one for their money because eventually they'll find out and leave us or they'll run out of money, we can't use creation without consequences. And what does it mean to value the inherent beauty in creation and to not make it change in order to fit our needs and desires? I don't know. Maybe it means looking at how our cities and infrastructures affect creation, what things we cut down in order to build up. What does it mean to make sacrifices for creation? Because it definitely makes sacrifices for us. Think about the food that you eat. If you eat meat, you eat animals. That is a sacrificial life there. If we do choose to eat them, what does it mean to recognize that sacrifice and minimize or eliminate suffering by not eating or buying meat that is mass-produced? What does it mean to you to view all of creation as beloved? You will have your own answer. It doesn't have to be one of mine, but we all have to have an answer, I think, as people of faith, as preservers of God's creation. We have to have an answer. God created the world for us to live in and enjoy, not to use up and destroy. I love what Walter Brueggemann says about shalom. He says, shalom is the biblical vision which affirms that all of creation is one, every creature in community with every other, living in harmony and security toward the joy and well-being of every other creature. The most staggering expression of the vision of this, he says, is from Genesis, and it's that all persons are children of a single family, members of a single tribe, heirs of a single hope, and bearers of a single destiny, namely, the care and management of all God's creation. Here's the good news. I asked earlier if God looks on creation and still calls it good. Well, I think that what God has pronounced good remains precious in God's sight, and God deeply loves what God has made. And rather than cursing or rejecting human beings and the rest of creation, God entered our world in human flesh as Jesus. God, our Creator, also became our Redeemer, yours and mine. And God uses flesh, created matter, to go about God's redeeming work in the world. And so Christ is our guarantee that things don't have to be the way they are. And our actions as the hands and feet of Christ are what ensure this guarantee. God's love affair with the creation continues, says one author, and it must become our love affair too. I close with a simple story, a children's story. I'm sure you've heard it before. I think it drives home, though, the impact that we can each have. One day there's a man walking along a beach, and the tide was really high, so there were all these starfish scattered all over the sand. And he's walking along, and he's seeing that they're still alive, but thinking to himself, gosh, it's too bad all these starfish are going to die. But I can't do anything because there's so many of them. But down the way, he sees a little boy, and the little boy is picking up starfish and chunking them back in the ocean. And the man says to him, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time? There's so many of them, you can't save them all, so what does it matter? The little boy picks up another starfish, throws it back in the ocean, and says, it matters to that one. Amen.
The beauty of this table is that